All right. Welcome everyone to a brand new episode of The Critics. First, when we get started here, I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself and why we started the podcast. My name is Vinay Raman, and I'm the CEO of a company called Carmo. And we started this show, The Critics, because because we wanted to create a monthly discussion about how to invite leaders into higher levels of performance and becoming more effective. Because for me personally, that was a really big thing that I desired. I wanted to be a world class leader in business. And how did I do that unless I had people smarter than me around me all the time, kind of helping me understand how to think better? The other thing I realized is that you need to have good insights into what's happening in your business. I happen to come from a data background, and I built a company where we pulled data from companies or metrics, KPIs, key performance indicators, whatever you may call them. You can get a real snapshot into what's happening with the company, and then you can make really insightful decisions. So my company builds all those data and those metrics, but how do you activate into that? Mandy, I know who's on the panel here today has talked about activating core values to me in the past. And how do you activate into the data that you have so you can make better decisions? Uh, I have a panel of experts here with me. And the reason I've brought them along is because they all have expertise in their various areas. And I want to introduce them all to you a little bit. First, I want to start with Mandy. Hey, Mandy, how you doing today?
Great. How are you?
I'm good. Now, for everyone in the audience, let me tell you a little bit about Mandy. I think of Mandy as a communications expert. She's the CEO of Image Marketing Group, and some key kind of quotes that I've gotten from her that really kind of stuck with me is that many businesses struggle to create meaningful marketing messages and define their culture. The way I think of that is if you're not very well grounded in who you are, how can you become really good at what you do? And she said, with a clear message and a plan, companies attract, retain the most desirable customers and team members so they can grow profitably. Matt, did I say that right?
You nailed it. That's my one-liner.
I've always thought, whenever I listen to Mandy talk, she is just, I love how she kind of separates the wheat from the chaff and says, so here's really the core issue at the bottom of it that we need to kind of start to look at and start to tease apart. So, Mandy, I'm really excited to have you here. And I want to get some opening comments from you in a second here. Let me introduce next, though, Jordan. Jordan, how you doing today?
I'm doing pretty well. Energized. How about you?
I'm feeling the same way.
Good.
So let me introduce Jordan. Jordan is the CEO of Cross Pest Control, and just some of my notes from our past conversations was that you really transformed the business that you were in by revitalizing the recurring services that you had, adding new business lines and divisions. But I think what really resonated with me is underlying or undergirding all of that is you really like to give opportunity for others to succeed and to rise up themselves. You feel like it's uh, part of your personality. So you just got to give back. Is that a fair way to say that?
100%. Mhm.
Good. Good.
Really, we've been in business for 54 years, and I think we've worked really hard over the past 3 or so years to kind of redevelop all of the physical work, so the operations systems, and now we've really more in the past year dove into our inner work and like what makes us tick, what are our core values, what are our KPIs. And I think once we kind of honed in on that, it has made everything so easy, and everything just makes sense, it clicks. And I think just like what Mandy said, when you kind of cut the noise, it allows for opportunity for extensive growth in so many areas of the business.
I love that four-letter word, easy. Right? When you do all the hard work, things. Someone said to me yesterday in a quote. They said, "Faster is actually slower. If you're slow and methodical in your progress and do all the hard work up front, it's actually very easy afterwards," which is the
Mhm.
word that you use. So I actually quite like that word. Last but not least, Sumana, I want to introduce everyone to Sumana. So, Sumana, I think Sumana Jeddy is the wellness coach. And I think of you as a person who comes into businesses to kind of give them a more holistic view of how they're running, what they're doing, and kind of where the incongruencies in the company are. Uh, what I noted down was you give them science based workplace wellness strategy for high performing organizations and individuals within those organizations. Uh, Words that I heard from you that were really interesting to me was this idea of, I think you used the word burnout. Let's get to people before they get to burnout. I also put my own words in there. I said before they check out the organization. Is that a right way to say it?
Sounds about right. The more evidence-based downstream interventions that can really help organizations prevent burnout, because we don't want burned out employees. We don't want burned out managers. We want people that are healthy and well. And I think the bigger goal with consulting in this space for me is just that chronic disease management. We don't want people getting chronic diseases because of burnout. And people don't realize that that's typically what happens. So let's pick them up before they burn out and give them those solutions so that we are ready and prepared to create not just a culture of wellness, but more an organization that is free from disease, free from illness. More wellness, less illness. Let's go.
So I want to make sure everyone who's listening in knows that this is an interactive dialogue. I think there's lots of nuggets that you're going to get from Sumana, Jordan, and Mandy. So ask questions. I'd like to first start out by asking people who are listening in, where are you connecting from? Just tell me the kind of the city or state that you're connecting from, and I'd love to just see who's connected. And we had a lot of people who responded for the podcast and registered. But I want to start, Mandy, with you. It's sort of an opening question for you. The topic of this podcast is this idea that there's profit that you're leaving on the table. What comes to mind as a communications coach, one that comes in these organizations, finds sort of the incongruencies of how they're talking internally and externally? Tell me what comes to mind when you think about this idea that there's profit being left on the table. Do you agree?
I absolutely agree. And when we talk about the workplace and the environment, my perspective is about how are you speaking with your team members? What are the words that you are using? How are you inspiring them to invite your customers into a story of success? And how are you inviting your team members into a story of success? And I love the book behind Sumana. It says humans, and I think there might be a brain there. And I come from the perspective of messaging through story. And so every brain speaks the power of story. We lean in when there's a good story. We fall asleep when the movie's boring because the story's bad. And so for me, when we talk about the profit, when you have team members that are in alignment, that are inspired to create a story of success for your customers because you've created a story of success for your team members and invited them in. And, I know Jordan can speak to this, especially operationally. When you ask your team members to follow a certain SOP or a standard operating procedure, and they understand why and how it relates to the greater picture of your clients' or customers' success, they engage. So from my perspective, I would start with, thinking about the words that you're using, your managers, your leaders are using to your team. Because if you have team members who are not doing the activities or the behaviors or don't have the characteristics that you desire as a business, they may be in the wrong seat. They may be on the wrong team, or they may have not been inspired with a story of success of their own.
Yeah, I love that. I'm as old as I am, I still love a good story. I think that's kind of how you started out, right? Boring story, people go to sleep. Exciting story, they want to be part of it. And I think that applies to employees as well as customers or partners and anybody else. Sumana, I'll ask you, sort of this whole idea of, let's tip the balance in the favor of wellness as opposed to illness. Do you feel like that story has something to do with it? Is it kind of like a personal story that people can describe to the culture of the company? They say, yeah, this is sort of the story that I want to be part of. Does that have anything to do with that illness versus wellness balance?
I mean, absolutely. We spend so much of our time at work. We're working. We get up and go to work, and a third of our lives are more working. If you're in healthcare like I was, we're spending more time working. So I think there needs to be, and I really do admire the work that Mandy is doing, the storytelling piece. And I always say this idea when I was burning out, what the managers were not paying attention to, my behavior, my movements, my actions, me kind of turtling in and not being my usual self, those things, you need to pick those things up, because your teams are burning out. They are very silently suffering, and their behaviors have changed. Their words have changed. They're not their normal self anymore. And it is the manager's responsibility, the leaders who are supporting us. It's kind of their vibe to check in on us and use the right words. And Vinay, I've shared this with you before in another podcast or doing one of my lives with you. The most important thing that an employee, especially high performers, that they need when we're burning out or at that cusp of just starting to feel like our mental health is not okay, is for their managers to tell us, we hear you. The words that they use to share with us how they're observing our behaviors and being there to support us. It's so important, because on the flip side, when they don't do anything, guess what happens? We get more sick. We get more unwell. We back off more. We put on our silent sufferer hat more, and we're like, we don't want to be bothered. We want to be left alone. So I really do think there is a story behind every single person. And maybe what we need to start to think about more in this conversation too, as well as we're learning more about, more wellness, less illness, is giving those tools to managers, because it isn't an innate thing. Not everybody knows empathy. Not everybody knows communication skills. So bring in people like Mandy and Jordan and yourself to like really give people the tools that they need to succeed, and employees to succeed, because we don't want ill people. Mm-mm.
And I saw Carl joined us from Omaha. Hey, Carl, good to see you again.
Hi, Carl.
And anybody else who's joining in, I'd love to see where you're joining us in, where you're joining in from, and what you've heard from Sumana or Mandy already that you appreciate, or what most resonated with you. But Jordan, look, we're doing this because nobody's being in business for charity. Mm-hmm. We're doing it to add some value and hopefully put a couple of dollars in our pocket along the way. So profit is kind of at the end of this. How do you reconcile some of this? Hey, we got to have this wellness, right? We got to tip the balance in that favor, right? We've got to have this empathy. But how do you balance that with being successful in business? I mean, I feel like that's the balancing act that most people struggle with for many of their years professionally.
So I would say that, while COVID was disastrous in its own, manner, as far as, global pandemic and everything, I think that really provided an opportunity for businesses to look inward and say, okay, at this point, what's important? And our team members were important. It no longer was just about the number. We needed that, first of all, the wellness, of our employees. We needed to make sure that they were okay. We needed to check in with them mentally. I think mental health has taken such a huge step forward as far as in the corporate world, where we're actually looking to that first. And I think that we aligned ourselves over the last 2.5-3 years now, that it became way more important than all the little granular details. And I think once we started to focus on that and giving back to our team members and, taking away Saturday stops and creating more of a work-life balance or integration, I think we actually started to see more engagement and more buy-in and more people supporting the vision and the dream. And so when we started aligning all these, our core values and our vision and mission statement and such, they really, really felt like they were being taken care of. So they wanted to one team, one dream. That's one of our core values. And we felt that they really felt like they were a part of something. And I think they understood that we were giving back to them. So, I think once you dialed in on those, what the well-being of your team members, all of the numbers start to click. You're able to see where people are succeeding, where people are struggling, and, provide that help. I think that has been pivotal for us. And that was a turning point.
So I want to maybe repeat back a little bit of what I heard, maybe kind of a synthesis of all three of you, is that if you can get people you get their hearts into the game, you don't have to ask them to show up. They show up because they want to, not because you asked them to. Is that a fair statement? Mm-hmm. And I'll maybe even extend that a little further. If you really want to unlock profitability, that's where it lies, is when they come to work because they want to get there, because they're achieving their dreams, not because you crack the whip and you call them at 4:00 in the morning to get to work on time. Right. It's because they wanted to show up and their heart's in the game. Is that a fair way to say it? Mm-hmm. So here's what I'd like to do for, we talked about this idea of objective data and unbiased insights with the data. And I think what I'd like to do over the course of this conversation is kind of make that bridge between how we have data that's already out there and how we can see some of the emotions, some of that emotional wellness or illness that exists in the company or companies, and how you can make that transition as a leader, because I think there's some real magic on the other side of that. And I purposely use that word. So I'm going to share my screen here and just consider for a moment here that what we're going to look at is we're going to look at some data from a company. We've changed all the names and information, but this is real data. But we're going to start with just a spreadsheet and what you can see with that spreadsheet and how you can start to analyze that and turn that into something. That's what I want to start to bring Jordan, yourself, and Mandy and Sumana into this conversation to show so what you can do with that and kind of how we go through every step. Is that fair? All right. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. If I can get the screen sharing to work. For some reason, I'm a technology guy and I still have challenges every single time. All right. I think you should be able to see what I have on screen here, right? Is that working?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So I think this is what was a challenge for me, is that, here's a spreadsheet that you can look at. And this spreadsheet here had lots, 100 some odd rows and lots of columns. Maybe I'll just start here. Sumana, Mandy, Jordan, have any comments? I mean, I think a lot of people just operate from here as the starting point. Do you all find this very effective, just operating from pure data like this? Is this the way that you all make decisions or counsel people to make decisions, just looking at spreadsheets like this?
No.
No.
What do you do?
I can go first if that's okay. Because I worked in public health and analytics and data, to spend my whole life doing this. This to us is just raw data. This is what we call raw data. There's really nothing here for me to make an informed decision. So this, if I look at it, I would need to synthesize it, analyze it, and create something of value, so I could visualize it in a way that A, makes sense to me as a scientist, and B, also makes sense to the public and also to the stakeholders who are making the decision. So this is just raw data. This means nothing. This is almost like the DNA, the different pieces of the DNA that haven't combined. This is just raw data. So this is useless to me.
Mandy, Jordan, same sort of thought?
Overwhelming. I mean, and we can't quite, Eileen, and the glasses don't do enough. I can't see all those columns, but it's just, this would be overwhelming as a leader. If I were to be handed this file and say, make some magic with it, I wouldn't know where to start. So yeah, I think this feels overwhelming.
Jordan, any thoughts or?
Yeah, I mean, I would piggyback off of that. I don't think that making a decision based off of this information, whether, it's factual data, whatever, I don't think that that's a well-informed decision, the way that even we make decisions in the business. We try to, we hear from the client, we hear from our technician, we try to get the full picture, we get history. So in order to make an informed decision, I think you need all of those things. You need the human element. And typically what I like to do is, incorporate fact plus gut. I like to use like my intuition and that, that empathy to see, okay, is this really what's happening? But, you take that data, you add your intuition, your empathy, and your gut. And then I think that leads to a more informed decision.
So I think what I'm hearing is a little bit of the story. And I think the underlying assumption there is, just looking at spreadsheets is not going to allow you to make good, insightful decisions. That's just the word you used, Sumana, was it's the DNA. It's the basic building block. It's where you start. It's not where it doesn't lead to an end. And here's what we did is we took some of that data from that sheet and we analyzed it. I mean, I think this is part of what you were saying, Jordan, about getting this gut feel, right? Starting to see some of the story. Mandy, you also talked about that narrative. We took that data and here's what you can glean out of it. So I'll walk through this real quick and I'd love to hear you all's thoughts on this, right? So we scored all these employees in there on a scale of 1 to 100, 100 being a fantastic employee in terms of their performance and how well they've done on all these various dimensions that they were being measured. So we recognize them for their efforts, who's really good at what they already do. And we assigned a dollar value to that just because everyone's looking for a return on investment. Going back to the idea that nobody runs a business for a charity purpose. They do it to make a profit. So we assigned some numbers to it, and that's that $1,600. So out of those 87 employees, 17 of them were what I'll call that B or better, the 80 or better. If that company started to get everyone to operate at a B, so those people that are feeling really good are probably at that B or better score, that 80 or better. The rest of the 70 are not. And I think that's part of who we're talking about here. And Sumana, I might say those people who are feeling left out, they don't feel like they're doing really well, are the ones who might be candidates for burnout or checkout. Is that a fair statement in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different reasons why they could be there, but burnout happens so much later. There could be a lot of different other reasons. Maybe they just have too much workload. Maybe they just don't get along with their boss. Maybe they're just not motivated enough. There's a plethora of reasons that could push them in that. I'd be curious to know what your data is showing, but yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So we analyze that and say, what if we could get all those people, the average person, to start to operate at that B or better sort of level, that really highly effective employee? This company makes about $139,000 per day in revenue. If they got everyone to that B or better, that 80 or better, that's another $40,000 per day in revenue. So the way I talked to this company about it was, you're a $40 million company that's disguised as a $30 million company today. Are you okay with that? And I wasn't surprised when they said, no, I'm not. And what I told them was, hey, look, what's sitting between you becoming that $40 million company or $40 million in revenue company is just all those people who are just not feeling heard, seen, valued in the company. Mandy, Jordan, any reflections on that? Does that make some sense? And does that resonate with you?
Absolutely. And, you talk about objective and unbiased insights. I like how Jordan added that level of humanity to it. And, we want to take this data and have opportunities with our team members. We know it is so expensive to hire and train and bring someone on board. There's reasons why you did. And so to have insight that you can use to help that person succeed, I think is human.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's a really important 5-letter word right there, right? Human. Jordan, any thoughts from you?
Yeah, I mean, taking the team member aside, I think it also gives you an opportunity for you to look inward as a leader. Maybe there's a miscommunication. Maybe there is, a difference in learning. People learn differently. I know I learn different than my husband, and that was an adjustment. But, learning each other's communication skills or the way that we operate, I think is really imperative to also succeeding as a team. So, I definitely agree with them as well.
So the reason for putting this slide up here is, I mean, I know me a number of years ago always wanted to see a return on investment. I always wanted to see the numbers to prove it. And I think we started this conversation with saying, I think the three of you or the four of us believe that there's real value in that, in understanding our people better. But actually, I think there's a dollar value on that. So what I'd like to do now is just kind of start to talk through how we can see each one of these individual people and how we can lean into them to start using this data in a way to empathize more with the customers, with our employees. I'd like to walk you through one employee here. This is Ross, and here's what I'd like to do is I'd like to introduce this, and Mandy, Jordan, Sumana, I'd love to hear your comments on this based on that. So we're looking at Ross. The average person in the company is scoring on a 1 to 100 scale. The average person is a 51. That's this gray area in this graph. Okay, that's the average. Ross is this blue area, and you can see where Ross has got his real strengths and his less effective or weakness areas. So it tells you that customer cancels caused by the tech is significantly below average. He is about average on the appointments service that have not been assigned. So look, there's all kinds of KPIs and metrics here. The point is, I think you can see that Ross is struggling. He's not quite at average. Mandy, Jordan, Sumana, thoughts or comments based on just being able to see this? And do you see some of the emotion of the individual in this?
I would want to know if Ross was in alignment with the company's mission statement. Can he state it? Because if you have a mission statement and there's no one on your team that can state it verbatim, I hate to say it, but you're not on a mission. Is that mission clear? Does it paint a picture of success, and does it have a finite date? Because when we think about, I live in Virginia Beach, and this is home of SEAL Team 6. And so everyone's familiar with our Special Operation Forces, SEAL Team 6. And when those guys are sent on a mission, they know what they are to accomplish, by when, and why it matters. And that is a little secret formula you can use to revamp your mission statement. If you cannot state it verbatim, or if your team members cannot state it verbatim, if you don't know it, you're not on it. Mm-hmm. And so, it's, if you as a leader are not every day pointing in a direction saying, we're going here, come with me, because that's where I'm going. This is where we're going as a company. Let's go. And you're pointing to it, and you're being repetitive with that message, because I believe that it's our job as a leader to be repetitive, because that's when messages start to sink in. I think if, one of the things you could look at is, is Ross aligned with the mission of your company?
So let me play back to a little bit of what I heard from you. I think what I'm hearing is, just by looking at this, the fact that Ross is kind of this blue area, not even quite hitting the average. Ross doesn't necessarily, can't get with the plan because he doesn't necessarily know the plan. Is that a fair way of saying it?
Well, I would say find out if Ross knows the plan. Is Ross, does Ross understand your mission? Does he subscribe to it? I mean, memorizing it is the basic action for it. Then there's really that vision casting that leadership can do into the mission statement and your guiding principles of your organization. So I think that's a good place to start. Don't expect to be the magic wand to solve all of the challenges with this one team member, but I think it's always a place to start with a team member that isn't living up to expectations in a variety of ways.
Jordan, have you ever had a Ross, and how did you approach that situation?
Fabulous question. Yes, I've had quite a few. But I think one thing that kind of stands out to me here is the customer cancels caused by tech. You could look at this a few ways. You might want to sit Ross down and say, like, hey, there's a significant problem here, and is there something going on? Is there something personal? Is there something at home? Like, it appears to me that in his graph, he's just under average. So maybe, that could be on us. And maybe that could start with leadership and miscommunication, or not providing the right tools. And, with this one being such a significant decrease under that average, maybe there is something underlying, and maybe there isn't. Maybe he's just not a right fit for the company. And I think that's one thing that companies need to do more of is, right now, Great Resignation, post all of that stuff, like, we're still struggling with finding team members. And I think that people are holding on to team members that may not be as fruitful or beneficial on either side. For the employee, you're letting them stay somewhere that maybe they're not thriving. Maybe they need to go somewhere else, and their path is better suited with another company. And I think you're doing yourself a disservice if you don't look at that. Look for the right person in the right seat. So that's what kind of stands out to me in this graph, is I would try to figure that out and then look at the bigger picture, managerial wise.
Mm-hmm.
Sumana, I want to kind of throw a little context in here and see if that kind of gives you some fodder for thought here. And that is, I'm going to put in a time frame, right? So the fact is, this data is being generated all the time by software. It's already there in the company. So this could be something that happened very early on in Ross's career at the company, or very late in his career, or after quite some history with the company. If this is Ross after 3 weeks, I think it tells you one story, versus Ross, who's been at the company for 8 years. It tells you kind of a different story. Tell me, from that wellness illness seesaw, What do you see here, Sumana? What kind of goes through your mind if you think in terms of, Ross as a 3-week employee of the company versus Ross, who's that 8-year employee? Any
Yeah,
thoughts?
that's a really good question, because as when I was recruiting teammates from my own department, we would give them a 3-month, well, typically it's a 1-year probation, but you typically do a little bit of an assessment 3 months in to the job. I think 3 weeks is not enough time. You're still learning. If this was Ross at 3 weeks, I wouldn't even flinch. I'd be like, we're just starting to get to know each other, my style, your style. No red flags here. I'm not even looking at the average. I'm cruising. I'm okay with this. 3 years later, now that's a completely different story. And if there's a way for me to put on some kind of a timeline and see if there's some specific maybe like during the busy season, during influenza season, which is where I used to work, or in maybe during Christmas time, or during really high summer season, this performance is starting to do this exact same thing. I'm not sure if your software can do that, but if it pings me at a specific time over that timeline, I could start to identify that maybe there is something going on. Maybe he's not the type of person that can handle high pressure job situations, and this is only happening at that critical time and not the rest of the time. Ross is A-okay. The second thing I kind of wanted to mention as well is, Jordan and Mandy both leaned on that a little bit, is this idea of competency-based wellness. We always say that we want to be able to assign the right person to the right job by managing their skills and their competencies to the job itself. When you interview for a job, you're always going to say, oh, I'm great at everything. I can do everything in this job description. But when you're in it, you may realize that maybe I can only do 30% of the job or 70% of the job. I really do hope you can do 70% of the job and not 30%. But when people start to burn out and that productivity starts to diminish, you start to notice that skill to task alignment isn't quite there. You're really good at data analysis. You're really bad at customer service, and it's consistently happening. Therefore, this sales job is not for you. Maybe we need to reposition you. And there's something called job crafting that we talk about a lot in the wellness space, is like maybe in these high peak, high stressful times, we need to put Ross out of this job into maybe something else for a short term, let him reacquaint himself, readjust himself, and then bring him back into doing, things that he loves. We want to make sure the employees are doing things that they're very skilled at. Of course, you want to benefit the business as well. It is a profitability business, but we also don't want them to be suffering, because if you tell me to do data analysis, I'm not going to do that very well. If you tell me to go do a presentation, absolutely, I got you. But Ross may hate presenting. So the skill to competency and the skill to task, I think, is really important. And then that variability and that timeline to pick out, where is this happening? Where am I getting pinged that Ross is, declining in performance? That's all I have to say for that one.
So I'll add a couple of notes here. Number one is we kind of started with this. I mean, this whole topic is around this idea of the profitability that you left on the table. Another way to look at this is this white or this very light gray space in the outside area. So you want your employees to be on this really outside edge here. That means they're hitting grand slams every single moment of every day. There's lots of room for growth. We talked about that $40 million company says disguised as a 30. This is part of that disguise, if you will. This is what they're leaving on the table here. So there's real room for Ross to grow. And indeed, because it is from data that's already being collected, you can show that timeline. You can show that growth. You can see that you're having a conversation with Ross, and that feedback or that skills-based mastery of the various components of the role, that competency-based wellness, I wrote that term down. You can start to see that it changes. So I'm kind of curious, just because I added that time element in there. Mandy, Jordan, did you all have any thoughts about that? Just in terms of that, does that time element add any dimension to how you think about this?
Oh, yeah. I definitely think so. Because, as Sumana, I'm sorry if I mispronounced that, but as she said, that can make or break the conversation. If you're first starting out, obviously you're working through the kinks and any kind of, training, uphill battles that you have. And if you don't allow for that grace, that human element, we're not perfect. So you need to allow for that. But if you're talking, even like a 6 month, 1 year, 18 months, that's when but before it gets to that point, that's when you need to reconsider and is he the right person for the right seat?
Mm-hmm.
I also look at this as possibly benchmarking, where Sumana or Anai, someone talked about seasonality of a position. we have seasons in our life as well. So it may not be a calendar season, it may just be a season of our life. And so, having some sort of benchmark data where you might be able to go back and say, hey, Ross, is everything okay? Because as a leader, you've seen the data and you know that he might be slipping in some areas. But I think it's also not just total time frame, but snapshots of time over time.
That's a great point there, Mandy, because I remember there was I feel like a 2-year period of my life during the summers where all my friends were getting married. And it seemed like every weekend I was flying out somewhere to go to a wedding. And 28 years old, I was not going to sleep early every night. So those couple of weeks suffered as a result of that. Could be wedding season that's affecting you, right?
Yes. Wedding season, I would say, I love that seasonality piece, like wedding season, depending on your job as well, or how the company functions. I'm sure the manager knows that there's like peak seasons of this company that are going to be very stressful and high intense. COVID, we've all been under so much chaos and stress that I think every day is been kind of random, but understanding your employees' baseline, not in 3 weeks, but give it some time, maybe 3 months is a good amount of data to collect, understanding your employees' baseline, and then also paying attention to having that empathy and that humanness. We've been talking a lot about that, humanizing their wellness, but also humanizing them to see that, yeah, you know what I've noticed, and I can say this for myself, they would be outbreaks of infectious diseases happening very randomly, and they know when Sumana is in outbreak mode, she's very busy, she's very stressed out, there's a lot going on. I would appreciate it if my manager would come to me and say, hey, I get it. You're like in a busy time right now. Maybe we need to give you additional support. That's one way to look at it. Or maybe we need to kind of take away some of your responsibilities and find a little bit of backup for you because we know you're busy. How does Sumana deal with her time pressures? And I mean, your manager needs to know that about you. I think it really does go back to leadership and, the storytelling, and what Mandy was talking to earlier as well, is just all about the words that we're using to describe to our team. And, do we have their back? Yes, have your back, good or bad.
So I want to flip to another slide, because this is just one snapshot of one person in that organization. And I think it's useful to start seeing different people and how they appear. So I'm going to move away from Ross for a moment, and we're going to go to Austin, who seems like, for all intents and purposes, seems very similar, except his customer cancels caused by tech are slightly better than average. So I'm starting to see, and I'm just kind of making a generalization here, that I've seen two people who've got a very, very similar profile. Sumana, maybe I'll start with you first this time, just to give you a thought. We've now seen, based on data that's subjective and it's fact-based, it's unbiased, we've actually started to see two profiles of people that are very similar. What comes to mind in terms of maybe that illness wellness balance, or in that organization when you see that?
So yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, he looks okay to me. I don't really see any red flags here. Your company score is 51. He's at a 52. If I'm reading this correctly, he seems to be okay, for the most part. It definitely does see, I mean, just from looking at that data again, his high points, I can't really read the numbers here. That 72, which is appointments. Is that what is it? What does it say there, Vinay?
Yeah, appointments service that are not assigned. So I mean, the KPIs could be easily replaced, right?
It could be whatever. It could be whatever. Okay. I mean, maybe I'm not reading this accurately, but from just first glances of this data, I feel like Austin's doing fairly okay. I wouldn't be too concerned about his performance at this point.
Mandy, Jordan, you guys sit in the same way?
I can go ahead. I guess I'm kind of in the same boat. I would be curious as to maybe what else we can do to support. I heard something recently that was kind of a game changer. Instead of asking, like, let me know how I can help, when you're addressing someone for support, instead say, how can I support you? Because it's not that open-ended, like, oh yeah, sure. How many times do you actually follow through with that? When you say, let me know how I can help, but when you ask, you're being intentional about how can I support you? So I think shifting that conversation would help, and directly ask Austin, what is it that I can do? Here's our metrics. Here's where you're at. Here's where we need to do better. Here's where what we need you to consider keep doing. Like, you're doing great. So I think this might be one of those conversations where maybe he's got something else going on, and that human element comes in again.
Mandy, I'm gonna put you a little bit on the spot, maybe throw you a little bit of a curveball, if you don't mind. Well, you tell me if you do mind. So I've seen now two people that are relatively similar in terms of the sort of the shape of their graph. Their blue air is pretty much the same. They're in the same relative position to the average. One way you could look at it is, I found two lower or kind of just below average, right around average performers. The other way to think about it is, gosh, I've made two people here, and I've defined what their roles are, and that average is something that I'm going to build lots of, and I've actually done that pretty well. Kind of two different ways to look at that same thing. That I've started to become very good at onboarding people and getting them to do their job in the way I expect them to. They're all hitting the average. As one scenario. The other one is, I got a lot of room to improve. Do you see both scenarios? Is that the way you see it, or do you see it any differently?
So I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
This score is out of 100, right?
Correct.
Why is 51 an average a good thing?
Mm-hmm.
I think, I like that we've taken, from an individual level, and obviously the parts, are equal the sum of the whole and the whole math thing, but I think there may be some, not just individual leadership or leadership of individuals on your team, but, maybe there's some bigger kind of purpose, vision, ideas that the leadership team can bring to elevate the average score for the company.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point.
Very, very much the case. I will tell you, some people have asked me about that 51 as well. So what we have seen in the past is that it's not necessarily just a nice, it's not the distributions that you saw in statistics class. It's not just a nice, neat distribution. If you have 10,000 people, it's probably going to be exactly at 50. But I think this organization had 23 people that we pull this data from. It's not a nice, neat, statistically significant distribution. So that 50, it'll vary a little bit because it's kind of slightly tilted one way or the other. But I think your point is well taken. We're starting to see maybe a consistent behavior starting to generate around this. Maybe it's time for us to either lean into maybe some of those core values, be more effective at leading into some of those core values, or start to say, hey, it's time for us to start turning some knobs and dials here to re-optimize for some other things that we have not necessarily been doing so well. Did I hear that right, Mandy?
Yeah, because there's, in business, there's inputs that deliver the outputs, right? And so if profit is the ultimate output, because you're right, these are not for nonprofit businesses. These are all, we're talking about for-profit organizations in our discussion here. Maybe we are not incentivizing our team members in the right way, because people do what you pay them to do when you incentivize them correctly. When you find the right player and they're in the right role and they're motivated by the right things internally and externally. So I think, there's a lot of questions as a coach I would bring to this organization to look not only at the employee level, but at the larger organizational level with operations and incentive plans and how they're inspiring their team.
I'll just add one more thing as well. As you were talking, Mandy and Jordan, the other component that came to my mind is I was thinking back to an employee that I had. Again, depends on how old or fresh this data is, how many years, we were looking at Ross 5 years, into this in analysis, and has a score been 52 in those 5 years. This is a good example of someone who doesn't raise any red flags, because just looking at the numbers, you're like, yeah, you got to pass, you're good, you're average, you're doing okay. But when my staff member was kind of like this, the one question that came to my mind was to have a sit down and then say to her, hey, you're doing great. I mean, you're not doing poorly, you're not doing wonderfully, you're not an A+ student, but you're also not failing the class. What can we do to make your skill set a little bit better? So again, going back to that skill-based competency thing and that wellness competency, to challenge them just a little bit to say, maybe, you're really good at this software. Maybe what we need to do is give you access to this new software, get you trained on this one. Let's get you in some courses. Let's get your learning going. And then we'll see if you enjoy that or not. there was a little bit of hesitation. Oh, I don't want to learn new stuff. I don't want to, I know my thing. I like the old school ways. But once the person got over that fear of learning and decided to learn this new software, oh, let me tell you, the magic was unreal. 52 was probably like 102. I was shocked at, and this person was like a boomer too. And I'm like, I was shocked at how quickly you're working with a bunch of millennials and you're like learning this brand new software. Let's go. So there's another opportunity there. So I wanted to share that.
Yeah, so this is a great point, right? I mean, so again, this area on the outside edge has no color whatsoever, right? And those are all opportunities for growth. That's where all that profitability sits for that company, because the average person is producing right here in this gray area, right? And this particular person is producing, in this case, Austin is producing that blue. This is that $9.5 million that's sitting on the table every day. This kind of just shows you essentially where that roadmap is. And I think, Sumana, to your point, now you can lean into Austin and say, or that employee in your case, hey, where do you want to get better? Because I want to get you to start to lean outside the average, right? I want you to lean into your own superpower.
Yes.
Does that resonate with you all?
Mm-hmm.
And what comes to mind? I think the key word that I've heard a couple of times, there's a couple of keywords: easy, human. I think this other one is this idea of the storytelling. Right? Does it help you start to see some of the story here, what's happening in the organization, as opposed to that spreadsheet, which is kind of an eye chart?
It could also be the manager. I mean, we're not talking about the managers here. Maybe Austin's manager is just kind of very basic, and therefore the employee is kind of performing at that basic level. And maybe what Austin needs is a little bit more of that upskilling and up-leveling of being with the right supervisor. When the right supervisor and the right employees come together, again, there's so much magic that can happen. So maybe we need to turn the tables a little bit and start to figure out who Austin's manager is. Who is that? And send them to Mandy.
Just to kind of chime in too, it could be on an operations level. You could have systems that are completely outdated. You could have that are inefficient. I mean, think about how many times you hear different people working for different organizations, and you have your C-suite making all this executive decisions that once it gets down to the people who are actually executing it, they're like, what are they thinking? They're not even using real data from the field, from the people who are actually performing these actions. It's not efficient. It's outdated. And I think a lot of times you need to review your processes. And if something's not working, and my favorite saying is, the definition of insanity is repeating the same thing over and over and expecting different results. If you cannot quantify where it is that maybe you're missing your mark, maybe take a more macro level step back and say, hey, as a whole, is my organization operating well? Not just on the individual level.
I like that, because to me, the word empathy and understanding and curiosity are very, very, very similar words. I mean, you can't be empathetic unless you're curious without passing judgment, right? You can't be empathetic without trying to understand. I think that's kind of what I just heard from you, Jordan, is this idea that, all right, maybe in the case that we've just seen these first two, we keep seeing the same behaviors amongst all of our people. Are we the ones holding them back? Are we putting the friction in place? We're not giving them the tools, equipping them to go to the next level. Am I hearing what you said?
Yes, absolutely.
Because I think it's important to remember that these KPIs are activities. They are the numerical outputs of the activities that we're asking our team members to do or be responsible for. So Jordan's point is very well taken, in that sometimes the activities that we're asking them to do are within processes that are antiquated, have a ton of friction, could be streamlined. And so I think it's also taking a wise organization wouldn't just be pointing fingers at employees for their responsibility. I think they would also, as Jordan said, look inward to see, okay, so we keep seeing this pattern in one of these KPIs with all of our team members. Well, let's look at the environment and processes surrounding that activity to see if we can try to streamline through technology, through processes, or through training to make that process better. And maybe we can see an increase in that KPI across the company, because I think it's not just the employee level. This really could be looked with all of the employees? I'm sure you do. It look at this data holistically, not just at the employee level, but at the company level too, to help the company make some good decisions.
Yeah, and I want to just kind of recount where we sort of started in this conversation. We started about this idea of the profits being left on the table. We started with this spreadsheet, and I think we all agreed that looking at a spreadsheet, you really can't draw that much insight because it's the DNA, it's the building blocks of all of this. But now being able to start to see some of these graphs, you can actually start to see, is it a process that you can start asking the right, better questions of Austin or Ross, saying, hey, what's going on here? How do I pull you to the next level like you did, Sumana? Or to your point, Mandy, is there something? Is it now time for us to put a little, a jolt of electricity into the company here, and let's see if we can't upgrade the way we're thinking or start to go a little deeper and focus, and where? Because now we can start to see those results on the graphs here. Or to this point that you made, Jordan, that maybe it's time to revisit some of the systems we have in place. We're putting the friction in place. We're trying to get them to go 100 miles an hour on Model T. It's just not going to get there. It's just not going to happen. I'd like to visit one last profile, just kind of as we kind of come to the tail end here. This is Hope. Hope is, based on some of the last ones, doing quite well. You see the average is the same, but Hope is really firing in all cylinders, if you like that analogy. I'd love to open up to any one of the three of you. What goes through your mind when you see this, based on what you saw with Austin and Ross from that same data? What comes to mind?
I think this is a great opportunity to model Hope, to find out what her attitudes are, what her actions are, and find out if some of those activities that she's doing really well can be coached in to some of your underperformers. She's obviously a rock star. She's your perfect avatar team member for this organization and the activities they're asking their team members to do. So I think it's really a deep dive and using Hope's best skill sets to help your other team members.
Jordan, I'm gonna throw out this idea. To me, it seems like you want to try to see if you can create as many copies of Hope as possible, because this is the home run hitter for you. Is that the way you see it, Jordan?
Oh yeah, I would to piggyback what Mandy said. I would try to duplicate anything that she's doing and replicate it and put it into an SOP. Get her to do just a massive brain dump of what exactly is her everyday, from logging in or clocking in to the end of the day. What are her systems? What are her I fully believe that in order to have a well-oiled machine, that you have to have all your systems in place and you have to have them documented. What if Hope were to leave? Now all of that information is gone, and now you have to start from scratch, and you're left with the Rosses and the Austins of the world. And now she has maybe progressed in her career, and you're left stuck thinking, okay, great, now I gotta start all over. So I would encourage anyone to document, get all those processes in place. It's very, very important.
Sumana, based on what I'm hearing so far, we want to try to create clones of Hope, and I want to kind of go back to sort of your area of expertise around this idea of burnout. We're seeing something like this, and I often talk about this idea that you can start to see the emotions in the graph, right? What we saw with Austin and Ross, we kind of saw people who are just kind of sitting in average. I don't know that those people are jumping out of bed as soon as the alarm goes off to get to work. I might suggest to you that Hope might. Do you see that? And is that on the opposite end of the spectrum from someone who goes down that path of burnout? What do you think?
I would go the opposite way of what Mandy and Jordan is saying. Yes, Hope is fantastic. She is literally the high performer that I work with. I was Hope, the high performer of the organization that burned out. So I would keep an eye on Hope. Hope's doing a great job. What's causing Hope? Of course, we know that she's wonderful at her job. She's a high performer. She's doing all the things that she needs to do. But now we need to keep an eye on Hope to make sure that she doesn't burn out, because high performers are very good at hiding all of their job, stressors. They're very good at masking their emotions. They're very good at saying, no, I'm okay. I don't need help. I will take on some additional responsibilities, and I will wake up at 5 a.m. and work until 9 p.m. if I have to finish the job. So yes, Hope is a fantastic avatar, the good employee that we want. what we see in organizations are high performers that are the quickest and the fastest to burn out. So yes, we need those SOPs. We want to pick into her brain. We want to have those contingencies built in, and we want to make sure that there is someone to cover for Hope if she does have to take a leave. But I would also encourage Hope to put her wellness first and maybe start to question, like, hey, when was the last time you took vacation? I haven't seen you take vacation in like a month or a year. Just start to like deep dive into her behaviors as well, because I started to neglect a lot of my wellness competencies when all I could care about was my job and making the employer happy, and making sure I have all greens, all A pluses. No one needs to see any reds in my portfolio. So that would be my caution, is like, Hope is great, but let's also learn to bring in those wellness pieces into Hope's life and career, and make sure that she's succeeding not just in the workplace component, but in other dimensions of her wellness that are just as important. So that would be my kind of red flag for Hope.
So Sumana, you recommend treating all of your team members with the same respect, meaning even your high performers, we still have to have those conversations with them, that are, how are you doing? What can I do to, or how can I help you? As Jordan said, we cannot ignore the hopes, because, and there may be reasons, she may be working, 3 more hours a day to achieve this score. And so I think you're right. We have to seek first to understand Stephen Covey and then be understood. So that's a good point.
I'm actually going to stop sharing my screen here for a moment, just so we can. How do I stop? There you go. I feel like we've covered a lot. I mean, and again, want to kind of come back to this idea that we have this spreadsheet with just a bunch of numbers. And just throughout the course of this, we assign some names to a couple of graphs, and all of a sudden we've got emotions, we've got systems we're trying to diagnose. We've got, hey, maybe we're not paying enough attention to someone that might be just kind of flying under the radar and just is hitting a home run for us every day. But on the other side, we've got 2 people who are just kind of phoning it in every day. Hey, maybe it's time to revitalize them and see if they still really want to be here or not, right? I mean, there's a lot of questions I think that came up. And I actually was looking at the slide there. This is actually from an organization, the data from a company that had 87 employees. And if anybody wants to see a printout of all those different things, I'll be more than happy to send you that PDF. Type in Hope into the chat, and I'll send you that PDF so you can see all of them, and you can see all of the different personalities that pop up. But I do want to kind of get some parting comments from you all. Maybe I'll start with you, Jordan. We started with that spreadsheet. We kind of got to this point. That's an eye chart. We started to go into some of these graphs and maybe that opportunity that's left on the table. Any takeaways that you would leave for people in terms of what you saw and what you've experienced?
I think kind of circling back to the beginning is just make sure that you're incorporating that human element. Like Sumana said, you have to check in with your teammates, no matter if they're performing well or if they're, super underperforming. You have to make sure that you connect with them, because there is such a form of trust and a bond that you create with those employees when you do reach out and show that you care. And even if there's not a whole lot going on, but even just showing that olive branch, I think really can elevate your employees' mental health, as well as feel like they're connected and you're not just sitting, in a closed off office behind crunching numbers and stuff, that you really care.
And there might be, and the best part of it is, if you do all that, I think there might even be some profitability attached to it, which is
absolutely,
which is a bonus, right? I mean, at that point. Mandy, thoughts?
For me, I would want to just bring us back up to the 30,000 foot view, and it's not necessarily only the team member, but it's also the leadership and the vision casting of the organization. How are you inspiring your team to enter into a story of success on behalf of your customers, on behalf of themselves? I think when you're as a leader working with a team member, you want to know what your team member's story of success is. But for them to come to work every day and collect a paycheck and do the activities that earn you profits, they also have to be emotionally attached to the mission of the organization. So I encourage everyone who's watching to say out loud their company's mission statement verbatim. And if you can't, we can go. Am I allowed to pitch here? There's a process that really can help clarify that for you and your team members, because it needs to be infused into your company's culture on the daily. I give everyone permission to be repetitive. Marketing and messaging is an exercise in memorization. So every day as a leader, you need to come with that vision and that direction, and get your team members inspired to move with you.
Thank you. Sumana, last thought.
I'll keep it really brief. I think we need to, of course, we want the rest ethic to be just as strong as our work ethic. So leaders, walk the talk. Make sure that you are resting. Make sure you are prioritizing your wellness as well, because we are watching you. If my leader is working 12-hour days, guess what I'm going to do? I'm probably going to do the exact same thing just to try to impress you. So keep an eye on the micro level and the macro level changes that need to happen. And we want those high performers and those low performers and everybody else in the organization not to be ill and deal with the cost of illness is just so high. It's just I just don't like illness for anybody. So keep that rest ethic in and keep that wellness up.
So I heard if the heart's got to beat, it's also got to contract, right?
Absolutely.
Well, for all those who listen in, whether it's today live or in the replays, thank you for listening. Please ask comments. I'd love to. Please follow Jordan, Mandy, or Sumana. I think you'll get a lot from following them and what they do and their experience. They've got lots of it and lots to share, as you probably have already witnessed. But Jordan, Mandy, Sumana, thank you so much for sharing your time and your thoughts.
Cheers. Thank you, Renee.
Bye-bye.